Hello, everybody. Welcome back to the show. It's Chris here. I'm very excited to present today's episode. Had a great conversation with a very good and old friend of mine, Jessica Brown. She is somebody who I've been talking with off and on since the tragedy with George Floyd. She's a very highly intelligent person who I feel privileged to be able to present this conversation because she's able to communicate some of the issues that are really critical in our country right now, and able to do it in a much better, clearer way than I could ever hope to do it. So, without further ado, please enjoy. So, how's it going? It's good to see you.
Going great. It's
Yes.
going good.
So you and I go back a little ways.
Yes,
We know each other from high school.
yes.
Yeah,
Did we meet each other freshman year in high school in Avid or?
I think so.
Okay.
I think
Okay.
so. You were in Avid from the beginning, right?
Yes, with Miss
Ms.
O'Coral.
Coral, yeah,
Yes.
the original. Yeah,
Yep.
fun times.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah.
Yep.
Um, well, I really appreciate you coming on with me today. I obviously reached out to you about what was going on with the George Floyd situation and Black Lives Matter, and obviously I've been talking a little bit about it on my podcast. I think it's just super important, and
Mm.
it's it feels like such a pivotal moment in
Yeah.
our country right now. It's like you're either on one side or the other. It doesn't seem like there's a lot of middle ground.
Sure.
Um,
Yeah.
so yeah, I'm glad that you were able to come and talk. I know you're very active in this conversation, and one of the things that I've been hearing a lot is that it's a time for people like me to listen,
Mm.
but at the same time also speak up. So I'm trying to do my part, speaking up to the people that need to be heard. But I
Yeah.
also wanted to give you this forum to say whatever you felt you needed to say uh,
Sure.
to
Yeah.
to to white America or to America in general, or
Mm-hmm.
you know any anything that you wanted to share.
Yeah, well, one thing I'll start off with well, thank you for letting me be a part of your podcast. It's amazing that you're able to do this. I mean, I feel like podcasts now are like the wave of really getting good information. They've taken over, what the news used to be, and so
Right,
it's great to be a part of a platform where you can actually have a dialogue and be able to reach people everywhere. So thank
definitely.
you for having me on.
Yeah,
I think what you asked me, what would I want white people to know?
yeah,
It's so much. I think what we need to know as Americans, though, is that racism is something, and when I talk about racism, I mean systematic racism, right? Where
right,
it is impacting policies, education, health, the criminalization of Black people. I mean, if you look across the board, these are things that people can look up on Google, but African Americans, Black Americans suffer the worst across all aspects of life. So we talk about educational attainment, health, wellness, mental health. Wage gap is complete is extreme. Wealth gap, economic advancement, all of that is usually on the lower scale for African Americans. I think the average income in this country for African Americans is 47,000 K, I believe,
mm,
which that is barely enough to live off of. I
right,
say all that to say, when we think about racism, it is something that has been so ingrained in our society, from our laws, our art, our
right,
science,
hmm,
how our socialism. It's all been manufactured to create this division between white and blacks.
right,
Um, we used to always talk about, oh, it's a classism thing, and no, it's actually not really when you think about it. And I'll talk more about that too when we talk about white privilege. But classism, racism, they all intersect for Black Americans. And I think if people really unpacked, and not just white Americans, but Americans in general, if we really looked at our history, look at our laws, look at how our country was formed, and how we've been engaging with each other, we would understand that this is not just a Black problem. This is an American problem.
Right.
You know, African Americans, Native Americans, we always, there's always this pushback on why we talk about Black versus white, right? And the reason that is because outside of Native Americans, Black Americans are the only group that has had multiple laws um, to oppress them and to make them not human.
Mm-hmm.
So, you know, there was even a law, and I'm not going to know the year, unfortunately, but I would say since the inception of this country, there's been this push to separate white versus Black. I
Right.
think we talked a little bit about this. Excuse me if I'm rambling, but we talked about
No.
the indentured servants, right?
Right.
Um, so, you
And the
know,
3/5 compromise, right? That was
three-fifths
around that time
compromise.
too.
Yeah, that was
Yeah.
around that time too. So this is
Yeah.
where you start to see
That's a
this,
compromise. I'm sorry, but that's a compromise, right? 3/5 of
right,
a person is a
person.
compromise. That's where you're starting the negotiations at, right?
Yeah, and that's really that three-fifth compromise is to say who is human and who is not. So who
Right.
is worthy and who is not worthy of human life. And
Right.
the only way that this was shaped was based off of the skin color, right? Because outside of that, you know, there were white indentured servants that were coming to America, and African indentured servants that were coming over here to work on plantation farms. But the plantation farms had such harsh conditions, a lot of people were escaping, but
Mm.
they weren't actually slaves. They were just servants. So they could
Right.
get their freedom after a certain period of time and get land. But the conditions were so harsh that people started to run away, white and Black.
Mm-hmm.
There was a period of time where both white and Black indentured servants lived in the same area. But what happened is because people started leaving and escaping,
Mm-hmm.
they, you know, these plantation farms started losing money. So they had this political power to start enacting again law to say, okay, who do we want to be able to say that they have to be a servant for life? And this is where you'll see some of these court cases where we had, and I don't know that I don't have the names, but I'd be happy to send you the link. There's this podcast called Uncivil that goes over this, and that's amazing. But you have a case where you have an African American man and two white indigenous servants. They escape a plantation farm because it was the harsh conditions.
Mm-hmm.
They were taken to court or taken, you know, sentencing after they were captured. And they basically, you know, the laws allowed for the white indigent servants to be free, but kept the Black indigent servant, and decided
Mm.
that would mean that if you were Black, you had to be a slave for life. And this is
Wow.
no other reasoning but your skin color.
Mm.
So when we think about, like I said, when we go back into history and
Yeah.
we really look at the laws, you know, we look at the science that would say that Black people were inferior to white, and their
Right.
brains are smaller, and they're, you know, they're savages. You have all these people writing these, creating this narrative, if you will, to
Right.
justify the need to have people enslaved. And that's the same thing with using Christianity as a weapon
Mm-hmm.
to justify the mistreatment. I mean, there were laws where if you were Black, you could not testify against a white man in court. So if you saw a white man doing something wrong, or, you know, killing someone, you could not testify against them. And that could even include a Native American person or an Asian person. They
Mm.
cannot testify against a white man. There are laws that said you can rape a Black woman, and maybe not say that explicitly, but that Black
Right.
woman was not did not have rights. They weren't a person. You had the right to rape this property. There were laws that prohibit, and really to protect white women who would kill Black children. So there were laws to protect them for that. There were just
Gosh.
tons of laws that really divided who was worthy of human life and who wasn't. And again, that is truly embedded in our culture. It's
Hmm.
just, like I said, it's not just a thing that has just happened overnight. This is taken centuries and decades.
Right.
The part to where we now have it to where basically people can't see why this oppression exists in the Black community because it's been so
Right.
normalized.
Yeah.
That was long.
I,
I have
but
other stuff to say, but I that would be the main thing that I want white people to understand is that
yeah.
your conditioning and what you think of Black people has been told to you, has been
Yes.
shaped to you. It has not been something that Black people have made you think of them. It's what has been taught over and over and over again. The lack
Right.
of knowledge, like we talked about, it not actually being common knowledge in history classes about how
Yeah.
slavery really went down in the South and how it actually helped build the North as well too. So I would just say, one, learn your history, and then two, start thinking, not you. I would want people to start thinking this as a humanity issue versus just a black and white issue. Yes,
Right.
know that racism has been shaped and manufactured, but also see like these are human conditions. We are in a country that's supposed to be wealthy, and
Right.
if you treat one group of citizens who are who are citizens, who contribute to society, not that that should mean anything, but and you're not paying them equally, or you're not providing them health care that they deserve, or there's police brutality towards this group. This is a humanity issue. It's not
Right.
just a black versus white issue. It should
Right.
actually put fear in all of us that these things are happening to a group of people just because of the skin of the color of their skin.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Yeah, no, you said that just so beautifully and eloquently, and to in a way that I wouldn't have been able to give justice to what you were saying. I, I think to your point, also, really, education has failed us
Yeah.
so much. I know when we talked offline a few weeks ago, and I was just saying how I grew up thinking that racism didn't exist anymore
Right.
because all the more direct, you know, blacks can drink this water, whites drink this
Mm-hmm.
water, and
Mm-hmm.
no black service here. Those are the more, and I mean, I think in the South a lot of that stuff definitely still does exist, but
Sure.
um, but in general, like, and we live in California, we're in a more progressive area. I don't see a lot of that direct, blatant, but I think to your point is it exists in such a conditioned response in us that
Right.
we don't recognize it if it's not. I mean, there are still people that don't think that race had anything to do with what happened to George Floyd. I mean, that's
Mm-hmm.
how in denial we are as a
Mm-hmm.
people. And I think you're absolutely right. The conditioning is there. That I think of it almost like a sports analogy. If you were held back for 3/4 of the game, and the other team was allowed to score, and then you start the
Right.
fourth quarter.
Right.
That's kind of where we are right now, and people
Yeah.
just will think, well, we're all that's what happened in the first 3 quarters. That's gone. That's in the past, but it still impacts what's happening today. I just think it's
Yeah.
incredibly naive to think that. I mean, for 400 years
Mm-hmm.
since blacks came here and were enslaved, it's only been 150 years that they weren't. I mean, forget about the Civil Rights Movement and Voting Rights Act and all that stuff, but even just slavery,
Yeah.
it's 60+% of the time that slavery has been in existence. I don't see how someone could think that the remnants of that aren't still in
Oh yeah.
embedded in our system, right?
Yeah, well, technically by law, we've only been, and this is talking about like escaping Jim Crow and also
Mhm.
slavery, right? We really only have had laws to protect our human rights for the last 54 years.
Sure.
That's not a long time. I mean, that's my mom's age, and I'm
Right.
including not only the Civil Rights Act that was that was in 1964, but I'm including Brown versus the Board of Education, which was in 1954, I believe. So
Hmm.
from those laws being passed, where now we can have, integrated schools, we're
Right.
desegregating, the South. We really have only been able to, enjoy, I want to say enjoy, engage in American, civil liberties for the last 54 years.
Yeah.
And I would actually say 64, 54 years.
Right.
So it hasn't been that long. And, the thing with us, right, is like you said, we haven't been, sorry, my baby might be crying in the background. We haven't discussed these things clearly in history. I was just thinking in this
Right.
today. I was like, well, what's the difference between now and like when Rodney King happened, or like the OJ trial happened? What's the difference? And the difference is we haven't been distracted. We're having to
Yeah.
be at home. We don't have basketball going on. We're not able to go to the movies. We're having
Right.
to be at home and to really think about these things, which is causing such an uproar, right?
True.
People have lost jobs, people aren't able to go to school. It's really, COVID-19 has really unpacked the inhumane conditions that Black people have been living with for since they were kidnapped and brought to America.
Yeah.
Um, and so, I think our education system has done a disservice, but also our society, because, I was thinking about it, as a little kid, or as a young adult, a young teenager, why didn't I know some of these things? And I'm like, oh, because I was too busy paying attention to Disney movies, right?
Right.
Or thinking, oh, I live in California. It's not that way. But
Hmm.
as I became an adult, I can see where there were little things that may not be blatant racist things, where
Right.
someone calling you the N word, or like burning a cross outside your house. But there are things like, if I were to qualify for a housing loan, I'm going to get a charge with a higher interest rate by a bank because I'm Black. Or if
Right.
I go see a home, let's say I'm, trying to purchase a home, and the person selling the home happens to be white, and they see that I'm Black, they may not sell the home to me. Or like,
Right.
in the Bay Area, they had a lot of redlining issues. So there's a lot of Black neighborhoods that were created, and they're mostly in industrial areas where there's a lot of
Hmm.
pollution, where there's like lack of parks. That's where they push all the Black people to live, Black and brown people. And that's the same thing I would say in, our hometown. If you go
Right.
to like South Sacramento, where the industrial areas are,
Hmm.
you'll see that it's majority Black communities. So, having these redlining policies, if you will,
Right.
um, that says you can't move to a certain neighborhood because you are basically of a certain background. Those are the ways that they have been done systematically within, like, I would
Yeah.
say, the northern states. Uh,
Wow.
yeah, so like you said, you can't see it because in your world, things are equitable for everybody. We went to a very
Right.
diverse high school,
Right.
where I wouldn't have known that people were, going to these things. But, like I had mentioned to you before, we had that young man who was beaten by the police for driving his mom's Lexus. Or,
Mm.
we can look at the dropout rates, or the graduation rates of Black people in that school district. How many of them were
Right.
Black? How many went on to get further education? I mean,
Right.
Abbott was created essentially to help young people graduate and think about school, and really help young people of color, or young people
Right.
who they have needed a little extra push. So,
Right.
yeah, it was done very secretly, I would say, in
Hmm.
California, and still to this day, it's very
Yeah.
systematic, very policy based, than
That's
blatant.
yeah. Wow. That's really interesting. Yeah. I and like I said, I'm trying to educate myself on this as well, and it's not something that you necessarily think about until you really start researching it. But
Yeah.
things like the interest rate that you give to Black people versus white people is not something that's
Mhm.
necessarily going to be readily known, by people at large if they're
Yeah.
not being told that. And as you said earlier, like our education system definitely doesn't do its part to try to fill those gaps.
Yeah, and unfortunately, this is for everybody. There's been this pull your boots up by your bootstrap mentality that isn't
Right,
actually true, right? And
right,
so we live in a country where we say, well, you got to pull yourself from the ground up. My grandfather did it, my so and so did it. But what they don't tell you is that for when it comes to for white people, they had a lot of opportunities, even back in the day.
right,
If
right,
you have someone that's willing to give you a loan, like, a lot of veterans came back from World War II. They had access to homes, they had access to, really to wealth. That's not
hmm,
true for some of the Black veterans that went over to World War II or Vietnam. They came home
right,
having to deal with the same discrimination that they had to leave, that they left with. So,
yeah,
like you mentioned earlier, that playing field has never been equal. So
right,
it's easy to say, pull yourself up by the bootstraps, or I don't want my tax dollars going to those people, when you really never had to really suffer, right? And this is where we
hmm,
come with the white privilege thing and why it's so hard
right,
for some white Americans to understand what white privilege means, because it doesn't mean
right,
that you've never struggled.
right,
It doesn't mean that you've never had adversity in your life. Yes, there are poor whites just like there are poor Blacks. The majority of white people are on welfare than Black people. So that's not what white privilege is saying. The difference is that as a white person, regardless of your class, you were able to walk into a building, you were able to walk anywhere and not be harassed by the police, not
right,
followed in a store.
right,
Um, you could, for example, where I work at professionally, which I won't mention on here, we could have someone who has a criminal record, who's been addicted to drugs. They can still get a job in there, in that department, or in
hmm,
that sector, with no problem. And their criminal history would never be an issue um, for that white person.
right,
If it were a Black person, that's not the same.
hmm,
So if I'm poor, if I have a criminal record, I'm not going to get a job. And if I get a job, it's going to be paid at a very low wage. And it's going to be, usually at the front line. I wouldn't be able to get into management,
right,
unless I had to work my way up there. So there's a privilege with being white. There are things that as a white person you may not have to think about, versus what I have to think about, and that's what white
right,
privilege really means. It's
right,
not about class. It's not about saying that your experience and facing any adversity isn't valid. It's just saying there are certain things that you do not have to think about that I do, or
yeah,
worry about that I do. It's
absolutely,
almost like with men versus women, right?
hmm,
If you talk, I was always taught that when I go out, I have to make sure I have my drink with me all the time. As
hmm,
a young man, have you been told that? Like,
yeah,
and men are never taught like, oh, you have to make sure you hold your drink, or if you put your drink down, get a new one because somebody might have put a
right.
whiskey in it.
Well,
That is privilege that you have as a male, and that's
true.
the same thing as like white privilege.
It's interesting too. Like the point you bring up, even in our terminology, our the way we discuss these things, right? Because I think of
Yeah,
boys will be boys, but then
right.
it's like with a woman, it's like, well, what were you wearing?
Yes.
And,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
absolutely, like it's the same kind of the same thing. I'm cognizant of the fact that I'm a straight white male. Like I'm in the most privileged group there is. I can see that. I think it takes a little bit of just empathy to be
Right.
able to, and that gets back to what we were talking about before. I don't necessarily have to experience
Right.
to to get it. You
Hmm.
can
Hmm.
channel something, like you have something in your life that you can channel to get that empathy for what the other
Right.
person is going through. And it's unfortunate that there seems to be a lot of people that don't seem to be able to do that. And
Yeah, yeah. Well, it's also because again, it's the socialization of whiteness, right?
mm-hmm,
What is white? What does it mean to be white? What does that actually mean, right? And it means what it's been socialized to mean is that there's superiority to everybody
right,
else,
right,
right? And so when you have that protection, if you will, that complex of being superior. No, these are things that you don't have to think about. You don't actually
Right.
have to have empathy for somebody, because at the end of the day, you're going to be okay. And I think
Right.
that's the disservice that racism has done for white people, is it has
Hmm.
put some white people in black people too, in a bubble of thinking that, like you said, things are okay, and those bad things could never happen to me, or could never happen to anybody, right? Because if you just follow the rules, if you just do what you're told, get that education, be a law-abiding citizen, you could avoid all of these things, and that's not actually
Right.
true.
Right.
It's like you said, it's like telling a rape victim, oh, you should have wore longer pants, and you
Yeah.
wouldn't have had that happen to you.
Yeah.
It's the same thing with the black person. When we tell black people, well, when the police pull you over, you make sure that you don't talk back, or that you follow their directions. I will tell you, as a representative from the black community, our parents have had those talks with us about how to engage with the police.
Hmm.
It is very rare that a black person would be acting crazy towards a police officer, because
Sure.
we have been told we could be killed, we could be
Right.
beaten, we could be put in jail. And so, following the rules, yes, I think that's been embedded in the black community, probably a little bit too much. Um, but it wouldn't matter, right? Because there's several examples of young black men and young black women being killed by the police who were following the rules, right? Like
Yeah.
Breonna Taylor
Sleeping in your
was
bed.
sleeping in her bed. She wasn't doing anything.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
she was killed. So it's a tough, it's a tough, it's a tough, complex um conversation. It's going to be a ongoing dialogue about how we can dismantle these things, but it
Right.
will have to start with us just trying to, I don't know, if you will, like, get out of the matrix. It's not a side.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have, because we've been again brainwashed, and right now with COVID, we do not have those distractions to keep us distracted from what's happening. I
Yeah.
could see someone being killed. I hear about a bombing happening in some place and say, "Oh, that's sad," and mourn for a minute, and then go right back to, like, who's playing in the finals.
True.
And that's not
Yeah.
happening right now. Now we have to really sit with honestly our sins of
Yeah.
this country.
Wow.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, that's I definitely hear what you're saying, and I appreciate you being so open. Obviously we were. I was going to ask you a little bit about white privilege, but you kind of addressed it. I think I was just coming at it with the place of, playing from the other side. Like
Sure.
I think people feel a certain animosity towards the idea of white privilege, but it's kind
Mhm.
of, as you said, it's not saying that you haven't struggled.
Right.
It's pointing out that there are certain hurdles that exist that you don't necessarily know about because you don't experience them. So you don't
Right.
even, like you said, you don't know that they're there. And
Right.
I really liked what you said about about history, about our black forefathers who maybe fought in wars and came
Yeah.
back and faced discrimination. Those are, again, the intangibles that we don't see right here,
Right.
but it held them back, and it absolutely would have that effect on their family, right, going down
Yeah.
the line.
Yeah.
How could
Yeah.
it not? You live on to the legacy of the people that came before you.
Right.
Obviously you would hope that it's gotten better comparatively, but it's not
Yeah.
gone. And I just I don't know, it's crazy to me that people can think that it is gone.
Yeah. Well, imagine being you're in this country, right? First, you're kidnapped from your own country.
Hmm.
You're brought over to a very new country. You're broken down. Your families are broken up. Like,
Right.
you are property. You are not a person. So that means I can sell you. I can sell your children. I can rape your wives. I can do all this stuff to you, right? Somehow we overcome that to now go into a caste system of Jim Crow, where now slavery is over.
Right.
However, you're not actually technically free. You can be a sharecropper, and we'll pay you still very less. Um,
Right.
Also, too, if you look back then too, when after slavery, this is when mass incarceration goes up.
I was actually
Because
going to say that. Yeah.
yeah, because the
I,
South had to say, well, how are we going to get all this free labor that we had
right.
before to build our economy? So now we got to start putting these people in prison.
Prisons are
So,
legalized slavery, right? Isn't
yep,
that the idea?
legalized. Yep, yes, the 13th Amendment, right? You are free until you commit
Yeah.
some crime, then you are property of the state.
I
Um,
actually just watched 13 too, the
yeah,
documentary, and very
yeah,
eye opening. Yeah, for someone like me who I consider myself, well learned and researched and empathetic, I learned a lot from that movie that I didn't know. Even just now, I've learned things from you just now that I didn't know. So
yeah,
it tells me that if I'm a person that is trying to make a concerted effort and there's still things that I need to learn, then what about these people that just don't think that white privilege even exists?
yeah,
It's like you said,
yeah.
we have to get out of this matrix.
Yeah. Well, and there's things that I have to learn that I didn't know. You know what I
Mhm.
mean? Like I had no idea that this is a second wave, if you will, of mass incarceration. This is not a new thing,
Right.
right? The
Like
war
the
on
war on
drugs
drugs, right, right,
wasn't new. It happened before. It's just
right,
again, how do you get free labor?
right,
And so, I guess my point was to, imagine now, you're trying to go off to fight for your country because, regardless of how we got here, this is still, I can't tell you what African country I'm from. I can tell you I'm from a certain city in, in California. That's
right.
what I know. That's what my grandmother knows. That's what my great grandmother knows. I can't
Hmm.
say what country I'm from in Africa.
Wow.
So, I'm here, and regardless of what I've gone through, I still want to be patriotic. And I go off to war only to be put on the front lines, to be killed off quicker. Because, a lot of the reasons why Black people were enlisted into the army were to be on the front lines so that they can be killed first. But I survived that for whatever reason and come back home to a country who still does not accept me.
Right,
um, Still discriminates against me. And now I don't have access to the wealth that I was promised, or access to the opportunity that I was promised. Like that, I'm saying all of this and giving this storyline because it's such a generational breakdown, generational curse. This is not like this has just happened in my generation. This has gone
right,
back far back, and it's been a repeated cycle of Black people having to be resilient, having to be survivors, having to um, honestly look the other way of the injustices that were happening. I'm sure in my grandmother's time there were mass lynchings. There
hmm,
were cities of Black wealth that were being bombed and being destroyed. My grandmother had to deal with affirmative action when that happened, and her being put into a place, a work environment in California where she was discriminated against constantly
hmm,
just because she was Black, or because folks thought that affirmative action meant now white people can't get good jobs, and that's actually not the case.
right,
My mom having to deal with things in the workplace. You know what I mean? So it's like it has been an ongoing thing. There's been some progression. A really good friend of mine, and I'm going to shout him out, Dante King. He does this amazing breakdown of this history and how each president, we talk about how we're getting better, how we're being
hmm,
progressive.
hmm,
But meanwhile, under like the iceberg, there are just these things that are happening. Like in Clinton, we thought Clinton was amazing. Oh, he was the Black president, but he's actually expanding, the prison industry. Uh,
right,
and giving more money to the prison industry to make sure that there's more prisoners. Hillary called young Black people predators. It was just there's so much that happens,
right.
um, and it's so complex.
Joe and Joe Biden. I'm not allowed to talk about Joe Biden. I've been because I've been told by people because I don't want Donald Trump to be reelected, but I
Right.
have some issues with Joe Biden. But I've been
Of
very, for the
course.
most part, quiet about Joe Biden because I do want him to win. So I don't want to
Yeah.
like put too much out there, but I do still hold people accountable. I remember recently Joe Biden is kind of the king of gaffes anyway, but he
Yeah.
said a couple years ago, remember he said about uh, he said poor kids I think it was poor kids can do just as well as white kids. Something to that effect. I might.
Yeah,
It was something to that effect. It was like, or like black kids can do just as well as rich kids. It was something like
yeah,
that. And then
yeah,
even just like recently, he was saying like, if you don't vote for me, you ain't black. Like,
right.
and he's like you said, he's supposed to be a proponent like on your side, but yet saying stuff like that, I just don't feel like that's helpful in any way. Um,
No, well, and my opinion is yes, I want Trump out as well. But every one of these presidents have participated in a very white supremacist system
Absolutely.
that
Yeah.
has, and I'm glad we got to this because I've been wanting to say this. We have so
Hmm.
many sayings about democracy and how it's equal for every man is equal, every woman's equal, all of these things. But in the background, we actually did not do any of those things that the founders
Right.
of this country said, right? Like George
Right.
Washington had like 123 slaves, you and
Yeah.
he chased down his one slave that escaped. Like, I mean, he chased her down
Really.
to
Oh
her death.
wow.
Yes, it's actually kind of disgusting.
Wow.
But it is hard to, again, because we have time now to kind of think these things through. As much as we have to band together and get Trump out, at the same time, Trump, Biden, unfortunately Obama, they've all participated. The Clintons, Bush, they've all participated in this very white supremacist system that has
Right.
pitted people against each other, because all of this
Right.
is us thinking that we don't have the same access to resources. So the whole, being afraid of immigration because they're going to take jobs, or being afraid of
Hmm.
of African Americans, black men, blacks attaining some type of wealth because it's going to take my wealth. It's all been again manufactured to and boils down to resources, like that fear embedded in you that you are not going to have a resource because of this one group is going to take all of them.
Right.
And that's not
Yeah.
true, right?
It's yeah.
So it's hard. I mean, I'm going to do my part, but I've been looking locally, like what can I do locally in my city,
Hmm.
in my county, to help kind of change dynamics, because I don't really know what the federal government is going to do for us at this point. And it is
Right.
all a ploy right now to make sure there is, I feel like both Trump and Biden are trying to really figure out how to get the black vote.
Hmm.
And it's coming off as disingenuous.
Right.
Yeah,
Right. And I don't want to vilify the black side of this, but I do think that there's a certain element of kind of, again, I don't want Donald Trump to win. So I don't want to bash on Joe Biden too much. But at the same
yeah.
time, I feel like he gets a free pass. I think he has like 95% of black support
Which is like how
because he was
where those
Obama's
numbers
vice
came from.
president. It's
Yeah,
really, that's all it is. He was Obama's vice president. I mean,
yeah.
and as even you said, like Obama, I mean, I love Obama as a man. He's the best president of
Sure.
my lifetime. He's a good man, but no, I don't really think he did a lot for progressing the black experience in this country. And not all to his fault either, but circumstances being what they were, he wasn't getting a lot of help from Congress to do anything.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, again, he was participating in a system that did not want him in there.
Right, right, exactly.
So, he had to
From
be
day
everyone's
one.
president. Yeah. And
Yep.
he had to be everyone's president. And I
Yeah.
get it. But what it means to be everyone's president is to, you know, oppress those that have always been oppressed.
Right.
Right. To
Right.
participate in this system where you're creating an other. This group deserves less. This group deserves more.
Right.
And so it's like I said, it's very up in the air for me, to be honest with you. I don't
Hmm.
really, again, what has frustrated me the most as I learn about history, as I learn about where we're at today, is there have all been these rules put in place, even for me. There's been these rules put in place for me to achieve excellence or grace, or to achieve being valued by white people, right? And every
Hmm.
time I get closer to overcoming or achieving one of those rules, the rules have changed. right? And so the power in white supremacy is, as you can see now with Donald Trump, and we can edit this out if you need to, but they've been changing the way that a presidency should go, right? He's been able to break all of these rules that were put in
Yeah.
place, and especially that were put in place for Obama, including down to
Right.
like showing your birth certificates and
Right.
your taxes. He has
Right.
not had to, he's not been able to do all that because they've changed the rules to allow him to kind of rule in this dictatorship. Uh,
Right.
which again, if we're really talking about American democracy, if we're really going to be patriotic, is totally against patriotism in this country. Like if
Right.
we think about the way that they've kind of dismantled, if you will, the three branches of government that's supposed to regulate, or the two branches of government that's supposed to regulate the presidency,
Right.
and there's checks and balances in place.
Right.
All of these things have been changed in
Mm-hmm.
order to give the president more power, and again to continue on this, white supremacy.
Even starting with the end of Obama's term, they,
Right,
if you remember, they held up, they had a Supreme Court opening, and
right,
a year before Obama was out of president, and Mitch McConnell and the Republican, they made sure, they're like, we're not going to put through a Supreme Court nominee until the next president comes through, and
that's
it
crazy.
worked out for them. They were, like you said, to your point about the system not working the way it's supposed to work. Um,
Right,
I'm glad you brought up. I'm not glad. I don't ever really like talking about Donald Trump, but
yeah,
I did. I did want to bring up. I don't know if you heard. You kind of were pointing out how the rules have been rewritten. He just
yeah,
says the most inflammatory, just
yes,
awful things. He
mm-hmm.
just recently was quoted saying, he was talking about kung flu for the coronavirus. I don't know if you heard that, but and
Yes,
he was getting called on, and all the reporters were asking his press secretary about it, and just running around in circles, changing the
yeah.
subject. But I wanted to ask you, what part, if any, do you think Donald Trump plays in this whole thing? Is he making it worse?
Oh,
Is
yeah.
is he? As I feel like he's emboldening people with their hate, that it's okay, to come out of. Do you feel like that as well?
Yeah, so I feel like again, what Obama opened up my eyes to me is for me is that racism never ended. Just
Mm-hmm.
the way that he was treated during his presidency, the scrutiny that Michelle Obama got, it
Yeah.
just made it seem like it never ended. Keep in mind though,
Right.
all of these killings of young black men and women being killed by the police also, and Trayvon Martin also happened during Obama's term as well too.
Right.
So I wouldn't say Donald Trump is increasing the hatred. I think it's always been there. I think
Right.
Obama, regardless of what he did during his presidency, he represented something that would have never been thought of. Like my grandmother never thought in her years of being here on this earth that she would ever see a black president.
Yeah.
I didn't think I would see a black
Oh, I
president,
didn't
to be
either.
honest with you.
No.
I did
Yeah.
not. And so what Obama represented was something that, you know, again, caused an unnecessary fear in the powers that be, right?
Right.
Even if he was aligned with them,
Right.
it still made black men and black women feel like they can attain these things. We
Mm-hmm.
have under the Trump administration, we have more women running for office than ever. Running for congressional seats and stuff in the Senate or not the Senate, but you know what I mean,
Yeah.
in the House and the Representative. Yeah.
Right. Right.
Forgive me. I'm like, but yeah. So I think he has. Trump has always been Trump to me. I'm
Mm-hmm.
not surprised by anything that he's doing. I knew who he was when he ran, and I knew
Yeah.
what type of president he would be. I think you're right. He has made it more comfortable because what he did is the propaganda is, made middle America feel like they have a voice, even though
Right.
middle America is not in his tax brackets and he can care less about middle America. We
Right.
know this by all of the social programs that middle America benefits from that he's trying to cut. So
Right.
I just think, he appealed to them because he was able to be very blunt with his racism, with his sexism, with whatever he isms he has. And
Right.
for some reason that inspired people. But to me, what it said to me is that the hatred, unfortunately, of Black wealth, Black accomplishments, Black achievement is so deep that these people would rather follow someone who is going to burn the country to the ground
Yep.
just because they're white, not
Right.
because he's qualified, not because he actually cares. And this also made me question, Christianity as well, because I saw a lot of Christians wanting to support Donald Trump because he was against gay marriage and abortion, but he has no attributes of Christianity in him at
Oh
all,
yeah,
outside
definitely.
of those two things that but that's not all Christianity is.
Right.
It's actually to love people regardless of where they're at and
Right.
not to judge them. So
Right.
the fact that a lot of Christians actually also came out to support Donald Trump was
Well, yeah.
fascinating to me as well too.
Yeah. I don't understand that at all. That's
Yeah.
yeah.
But again, it's about the resources, because I remember when Donald Trump was running, I would get into it with a couple of Christian groups about, why would they vote for somebody who can see what's happening in Syria and say, no, those people can't come over here. They don't need to come over
Right.
here. Let's
Right.
ban them. How did you vote for that person? And a lot of them would say, well, because they're going to take all of our resources. And I said, oh, that is the thing. It's this fear of losing resources.
Right.
If you're a Christian person, you would know that God provides your resources, not man. So you
Right.
should be able, if you're blessed and fortunate to have abundance of resources, you would share them with your neighbor.
Right.
So it was very a contradictory of things.
Yeah.
Anyways, yes, I do think that this has allowed folks to be more comfortable with their racism.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. I was thinking also when you're talking about Obama, Obama actually is half white too, right? He is half black, half white, but he's
Yeah.
only defined by being black. And
Oh, of course.
I feel like part of uh, that's almost part of white privilege in that you're sort of separated from whatever comes with being black or Asian or whatever. Where,
Right.
but if you're half black, obviously you still look black. I mean, you're light skinned, but
Yeah.
his being black is what defined him.
Yeah.
He's the first black president. Like,
Yeah.
and it's that's not a bad thing that he's identified as black, except that it's the bad things that come with being black, as you said, like the way he was treated in Congress. It was Donald Trump was the one that did the whole birther.
Yeah.
That he was
Yeah.
the one who spearheaded that. Um,
Yeah. And if you
so
remember in the 13th documentary, you know how, I think it was Reagan's chief of staff or somebody was advising him, like, it's not okay to, or Nixon, I'm sorry, Nixon's chief of staff. He was saying it's not okay to say we don't like, black people, but you have to use different wording. So you
right,
have to use like, well, we don't like, certain people from that zip code, or like people that have certain education can't be over here. Like it's now the subtle way of basically saying black people.
right,
Right. And Obama, when I talk to biracial people about, and biracial like white and black, when I talk to them about racism, they will never be able to say that they're white. They will always be
right,
looked at being black, no matter, even if they don't identify with anything in the black community. They will
right,
never be able to tell white America, no, I'm actually white. They'll be like, no, you're not, you're black. And that comes from the one drop rule, which again happened in slavery.
yeah,
Any drop of black blood, you
mm,
were going to be black and you were going to be enslaved. So yeah, it's Obama, even if he did not identify with the black community, he would not be able to claim himself as white.
right,
uh, and he would always be considered black,
right,
especially with his family, his wife. Like, yes, he would always be seen as the black president.
right,
Yeah, I think that answers your question.
yeah. Um, so I wanted to jump over really quick to because we talked a little bit offline. Um, I don't think much like terrorism really that I don't think that racism is something that is ever going to be fully eradicated, but
Yeah.
we were kind of talking about the different steps, education being a big part of it. um,
Yeah.
defunding the police is something that we're hearing a lot about right now.
Yeah.
And I hear people who are anti defunding the police, they seem to think that it means that we're going to just obliterate the police or get rid of them. And I know we talked about this before. I wanted to actually read you a quote. This speaks to the power of Google, and
Yeah.
part of why I get frustrated, people not educating
It's
themselves.
Google, right?
I literally Googled defunding the police,
Hmm.
and this the first thing that came up from Brooking.edu. So this is a legitimate source. They say defund the police means reallocating or redirecting funding away from the police department to other government agencies funded
Yeah.
by the local municipality.
Right.
So in other words, the money's not just being thrown away. It's like we had talked about before about better
Hmm.
training. Maybe different people besides the police could be responding to certain situations that
Yeah.
they're not properly trained for. So
Right.
it's about taking the money and using it towards a better purpose, right?
Right. Right.
What are your thoughts on defunding the police, and is that a
Yeah.
positive step in the right direction?
Yeah, well, it's crazy because you never hear this pushback when we talk about defunding education, right?
Right.
When we talk about education and the cuts that are getting done with just education, the teachers being overwhelmed and giving 30 students to a classroom, no one ever gets upset about that. Everyone's like, oh, oh well. And I don't know exactly where the again, it's a fear. It's a fear because I think
Right.
some folks, when I've talked to people about it, they're like, well, what about violent crimes? And like you said, defunding the police does not mean abolishing the police, although there are some people who want to abolish the police, rightfully so, right?
Yeah.
In certain communities, I actually was just at a Juneteenth celebration, which was beautiful, and the police were not there, and
Hmm.
the community itself, they would police their own,
Hmm.
the own celebration. Like there was almost a fight there. Some men stepped in and said, hey, not today, there's kids out here. The
Hmm.
two gentlemen that were going to fight said, thank you, okay, shook hands, walked away.
Hmm.
So we're talking about community policing, right? A lot of these
Right.
incidents that are happening with the police is because you have police coming from outside of the community, um, and over policing certain communities.
Hmm.
So police, again, not being engaged with that community that they're over policing. So they're already walking in an environment where they're also fearful, where their intentions are high alert. And I'm not saying that, being a police officer is a very stressful job. So of course you're going into a community that is unknown, that you've been told to have high crime rates, and and you've been told has this, and this, for whatever makeup the community is. So you're going
Right.
in there with high alert anyways, right?
Right.
But you haven't developed a relationship with the community. You haven't even walked around the community to see what it's about, to look at
Hmm.
the beautiful things of that community. You're just in there policing it, and you're
Right.
creating this tension between the residents. So I
Yeah.
would say we do need more community policing, police that are within that community, that live there almost.
Absolutely.
I know the fear is like, well, then people know where the police live. Well, if the police didn't have a bad reputation, why would that be a problem? Like,
Right.
you know what I mean? If
Right.
they are engaged in the community where they can walk down and they know their neighbors and they're there to help people, why
Yeah.
would a police officer living in that community be a problem? It's a problem because the police have a bad reputation.
True.
Um, and so with defunding the police, in my mind, it would mean what you just said. It would be for nonviolent offenses, have someone go out there. And I mean, like, when I mean nonviolent, I mean like mental health. If someone's having a mental health breakdown, send a mental health worker out there, put some money towards our behavioral health services, and have them
Yeah.
actually go out to the communities, to help with mental health issues. Because a lot of
Right.
these things, like, seeing violence in your community every day, not trusting the same people that are supposed to protect you, that mess up your mental health. Being homeless, being hungry, not having, having this huge wage gap that impacts people's mental health. Drugs, right? So,
Absolutely.
like, send a substance use specialist when somebody's having an overdose. Send an EMT and then a substance use specialist to help that person. Like we do that already. When you call 911, the first people that come out are going to be the fire department or EMT if there's an issue.
Right. Right.
So we already are outsourcing the services of the police. Why not
Sure.
have the police focus on when it comes to violent robberies, criminal offense,
Yeah.
our sexual assault, all of those things that are important that they should be spending their time on. Children, people missing, they should do that. Other stuff that can be handled by the community, give the money to those programs to really help
Right.
impact the communities. That's what
What?
defunding means to me.
Why are there 4 armed officers for a counterfeit $20 bill?
That's the
Right.
issue. A waste of police resources. Why? And then let's really go back. Why are you calling the police for $20 bill?
Right.
We also have to. It's not just the police, right? Yes, the police have been enforcing violent acts of terrorism on people, but let's talk about the citizens that have called the police on these minor offenses.
Oh yeah.
I've got my car broken into. I didn't call the police.
Mhm.
Like, you've seen a neighbor walk around here, like, that you don't know, you're calling the police on them. Like,
Mhm.
what is it about you that where you see something that is not familiar to you, you automatically think let's
You
call the
call the
police,
police.
right?
That's
There's been
interesting.
several
Yeah.
instances. Yeah, I used to teach this thing on microaggression, and one of my colleagues, she was amazing.
Mhm.
We did this scenario where we wanted to kind of unpack, like, okay, what's the police feeling? What is the person that the police has been called on? What are they feeling? And then what is the person who called the police? What are they feeling? So, for
Mhm.
example, we had a young Black man who worked at the hospital, and he was driving around because there's no parking, right? The parking's terrible. So he was driving around the neighborhood looking for a parking spot. This woman sees him driving around. She calls the police. The
Mhm.
police pull him over. He had to explain to the police that he is no threat. He works at the hospital. He's just trying to get to work. They let him go, thank God, but he's terrified. The police
Yeah.
called on him, right?
Yeah.
um, and then he has to suck all that up, all that feeling, and go into work
Mhm.
and explain to his supervisor why he's late, because
Right.
some lady called the police on him for no reason, basically, and the
Mhm.
police came out.
Yeah.
So we
Yeah.
have to also hold our citizens accountable. Like, are you really using the police officers time wisely?
Right.
$20 bill, cigarettes, stealing some Skittles in the store. What is that going to do to you? Nothing.
That's uh,
These are things that can be replaced, but these people's lives that have been lost. I mean,
yeah.
these are lives. This is not like, it's not a TV show. This is somebody's father, somebody's mother, somebody's sister, brother. Like,
Right.
they have to mourn this now over a fucking, excuse my language, over a
No, it's okay.
$20 counterfeit bill.
I. It's
The life
interesting.
has to be gone off of that.
Yeah. I mean, and to your point, I mean, I'm thinking about the big ones that I know of. Philando Castile reaching for his wallet,
Right,
right? The counterfeit, the Eric Garner and the cigarettes,
right.
Trayvon Martin, as you mentioned, the Skittles, and he's literally just walking his with
Yeah,
a hood. I
yep.
mean, and the little boy Tamir Rice with the
With the fake
with the
gun.
toy gun.
Yep, yep.
These people were. This was 5 lives. They're gone. They
They're
don't get the
gone.
rest of their lives because of that. And somebody called in, like you said,
Yeah,
somebody called in the little boy. That's why the police showed up. So yeah,
right.
hold the police accountable for their actions, but also why are they there? Who's the one
Yeah,
who's instigating this
yeah.
interaction?
Well, it's our own biases. It's our implicit biases, right?
Right,
That, again, we've been socialized. We see
right,
black, we see wrong, and
right.
we can even say that for even within the black community as well too.
Sure.
We've been socialized to think, well, those people over there are wrong. If they're
Right,
poor, if they're so-called thugs, they're doing wrong, and that's not even the case, right?
right,
And so, yeah, we have to, as a society, along with the police, really unpack our implicit biases, and why would $20 counterfeit bill mean anything to us?
yeah,
Why are these things so valuable to where now we are, um, you know, uh, now we are mourning the life of someone over something so small.
right.
The woman, I don't know if you saw in the park, who was had her dog off a leash.
Yeah, I did see
The
that
black
one.
man told her to put the dog on the leash.
Right.
Her reaction was, I'm going to call the police to kill you because I don't want you telling me what to do. Like,
Right.
again, these are some things that we have to start unpacking. Like, why somebody telling you to follow the rule to put your dog on a leash now makes you want to weaponize the police against them.
Yeah, it's interesting because on a very on a smaller scale, it seems quite equivalent to the reaction that you get to calling out the idea of white privilege, or even just
Yeah,
calling out bad behavior by the cops. Hey,
yeah.
how how dare you say that our cops are these bad people? We love the cops, we support the cops. Well, we love good cops. But
Yeah.
if you're a good cop, then you shouldn't be protecting bad cops. If you're protecting them, then you're not a good cop.
Well, we can't
Um,
afford to have bad cops. That's
right,
like having a bad pilot. You don't want to be on a
right.
plane with, this is what Chris Rock said. You don't want to be on a plane with a bad pilot. You don't
Very
want to
true.
be in
Yeah.
surgery with a bad doctor, surgeon.
Right,
You have
right.
to have good cops. There's no excuse for, there's some bad apples or some good apples. With
Absolutely.
all the money that you all are getting, because I'll tell you this, when they talk about defunding the police, it's a small percentage of their budget that some counties are even asking to reallocate. It's not
Right.
even a lot. They get more money than education.
Yeah.
And again, their jobs are very intense, but with all the money you're getting, you shouldn't be bad. There actually should be no bad cops at all. There
True.
should be,
Yeah.
every cop should be on their P's and Q's, because you cannot afford to have bad cops.
Right.
You shouldn't even make that an analogy for you. Like,
Right.
uh,
Yeah.
and then I would, again, I have to say, as a society, when we think about, like, we had Dylan Ruth, he walked into a church and he killed 9 people.
Yeah.
He was able to, nine people who prayed with him before he murdered them.
Yeah.
Were able to securely get him and
Hmm.
take him to get a cheeseburger.
Right.
But you kill a man for $20, a $20 count. Like, again, we have to really unpack, us as a society, why that's normal, why that's not
Right.
different.
And right.
Nia Wilson was a Black woman who was on a BART, and her and her sister were stabbed to death by a white man.
Hmm.
And he's in court. They denied this, but he was going to claim insanity.
Hmm.
He's hurt these 2 girls that he had no association with, that weren't bothering him. He stabbed them and he murdered one of them. She was 19 years old.
Hmm.
But you know what they did to her? They villainized her. She had a picture of her holding a toy gun.
Hmm.
They showed that first, versus showing, this monster who just murdered, took a young life, and then
Yeah.
put her sister in critical condition. So again, that's that. We have to unpack, us as a society, what is so broken with
Yeah.
American culture, to where we can see some of our citizens being treated like animals, being slaughtered, and
Right.
not have sympathy for them.
Right. And rationalize or justify it. Like,
Yeah,
we talked before about George Floyd. I hear people talking about his criminal past and things that he's done. I honestly, I don't care. I don't care what the man, even if it was Dylan Roof. I mean, even if
yeah,
if Dylan Roof was handcuffed and the guy's just leaning on his back until
right.
until he breathes his last breath,
Yeah,
choke, kills
terrible.
him. Don't you think there
Yeah.
would have been some backlash for that?
Oh
Even,
my
even
gosh.
for Dylan Roof, who, like you said,
Yeah,
murdered 9
yeah,
black people. I
yeah,
mean, again, it's just it doesn't matter what the person. You have him in custody. He's not a
yeah,
threat
yeah.
anymore.
Well, that's when people are ill informed about our criminal justice system. Black people get harsher punishments for lower
Right,
level crimes. Those are
right,
facts. I'm not
yeah,
making that up. You can
right,
Google that. You can look that up. You can watch a documentary. Like, I'm not even giving my opinion. When
right,
you're
right,
ill informed about that, yeah, you're gonna make that assumption,
right,
because we talked about Candace Owens. Yeah, she's saying, like, why are we making this person a martyr? And in my eyes, he's not the only person that died in
right,
that 3-week span that we heard of. But it's not about making him a martyr. It's about the injustice that are happening here.
Right.
As you know, I remember watching a little clip on Fox News about all of these newscasters who were saying how George Floyd's criminal record, or these protesters are criminals, but they themselves had criminal records. So it's, again, this is what we talk about white privilege, where
Right.
you know, you could go to jail, you could be charged with a crime and be a newscaster. That doesn't happen for Black people who are, again, lower level crimes, but given 20 years in prison, or having the same crime as a white person, but that white person getting 6 months and that one person getting 20 years. So again, when you don't know history, you can make an ill-informed statement that is, again, that doesn't actually go, that doesn't make sense. You know what I mean?
Right. Right.
Like, I can't even take Candace Owens seriously if she doesn't know her history. If she knew her history, if she understood the law, she understood how the law has been unjustly put on Black and brown communities, she wouldn't be saying statements like that.
Right.
And it's, again, in her brokenness, again, like I said, it's our brokenness. Like, what is so broken about us, where we can see someone, like you said, with a knee to their neck, and be quickly to criticize them, or we're setting up this culture of who deserves to live and who doesn't. Same thing what we did with slavery. Who deserves to be treated as a human and who doesn't deserve to be treated as a human? So now are we saying that people that have criminal records, they deserve to have a knee on their neck and die because they have maybe made one or two or three mistakes in their past, you know?
Yeah. Isn't that why all lives matter is so insulting, because it's so counter to what, the experience. I mean, it's like, yeah, as an ideal, sure, all lives matter. We would love for that to be the case, but clearly, as you said, history is showing us otherwise.
Yeah. Well, we're not aliens. Black people are not aliens.
Right.
We're human beings, Black and white people, Asian people, brown people, whatever. We are all the same. The only thing that's different is our skin color and our culture. So again, as I had posed the question earlier, if you can see a citizen of your country being treated in a disgusting manner, and you sit here and you say, what about me? Like, what is so broken about you to where you can't see that this means you? If we keep allowing the police to act with no rules, to act unjustly, to be the judge and executioner, that doesn't just impact Black people. I've seen videos of police, I mean, body slamming little white girls down to the ground. I mean, if we're going to go there, like, yes, it's happening to Black people at disproportional levels, of course. And I'm not, but I'm also saying too, this could happen to you and me easily.
Right.
Like, if we keep allowing the police to kind of get away and not cause for justice, it will now move over to the skateboarders, or it will move over to the hippies, or it will move over to, the white gay men, or just any group that they have a difference with. Like, so it's, again, this is a human rights issue. It's not about civil rights anymore. It's about how you value us as human beings. And that's all that we're asking for. We're just asking to get the same respect, love, and care and value as any white person on this earth. Because this is not just an American problem. Unfortunately, systemic racism is a global problem everywhere. Like, anti-Blackness is a real thing across the globe, and it's gonna take a lot to get rid of that. Of course.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Well, I really appreciate you coming on here and just being so candid and direct. I think it's a privilege to talk to you. As I said, you've educated me even just now. I think that's what we need, and I think like I said, empathy is such a big part of it. We need to just be able to listen to each other.
Yeah.
So I'm gonna keep continuing the conversation and hope that we can find ways to work together and make this a better world for all of us.
Absolutely. And one more thing I would ask white people to do. Black people, we don't need performative gestures. So we don't need the kente cloth, taking the knee. We don't need, the Black Lives Matter hashtag on your car. What we need is some real systemic changes.
Right.
So You know, if a white person is saying all Black lives matter, but then they're going into work and they're treating their Black employee or their Black colleague terribly, you're not really for Black Lives Matter.
Absolutely.
What we're asking for is for real systemic changes. Like, think about the companies you support. Do they have Black executive, Black leadership? Think about the companies that you work at. You know, your colleagues, do you have a diverse voice? Like, even for your platform, you've been doing a great
Right.
job of making sure you're having everybody come on here that you can hear from. You
Right.
know, that's what we're looking for, and we're not looking to always only be the voice of equity and diversity. Like,
Hmm.
stop trying to hire Black people just to only work on equity and inclusion stuff. Like, hire us to
Right.
be a part of the company and to really contribute and build wealth. Like, those are the things that we need. We need the wage gap to be closed. We need to be able
Right.
to buy homes and to live in better neighborhoods
Hmm.
and to put our children into better schools. And I think, like, you know, as white people, what we can, what I said we, what you all can also start doing is, like, even in your school system, advocate for like real history to be taught versus
Right.
this kind of watered down version. Like,
Hmm.
we need white people to do those types of things, like really understand, like, this is just not about performative gestures. We need you
Yeah.
to your platform to also educate your other you know, white brothers and sisters on, you know, what they can do to contribute, and not just donate to Black Lives Matter or just go out to the
Right.
protest for just the selfie. Like, really be
Right. Right.
about dismantling, because here's the thing, as we see with COVID, this impacts you all. If we
Right.
have a government who cannot even have it build an infrastructure to respond to a pandemic that impacts everybody, because viruses know no color.
Right.
Like,
Right.
that it should be telling. You know, if you have a
Yes.
governor who is now, our government who is pretending that COVID does not exist anymore,
Right.
that should be scary for all of us.
Yes.
But we have to understand, again, this is not a
Absolutely.
Black versus white thing.
Hmm.
This is a humanity issue. And we have to
Absolutely.
unpack the brokenness in our humanity and get back to a point where we can love each other
Yeah.
regardless of where we come from, regardless of, you know, our backgrounds, our class, our, you know, sexual preferences, gender identity. Like, we need to get back
Right.
to that. Not even back. I don't even know if we've ever been there.
Yeah.
Maybe in the
Yeah.
70s, but
Yeah.
we need to get to that level, to
Absolutely.
where we are not a melting pot, but a salad bowl. And we value all the differences that are
Right.
in that salad bowl. I don't want to be a melting pot. I want us to be different, but also appreciate the uniqueness of us.
Right.
So,
Right. No, I mean, I think you're so right. The COVID, it does feel very related. I mean, we're approaching 130,000 people dead, and people say, oh well, it's just old people, or if you're young and healthy, it's not a big deal, or just stay home if you're old. It's like, oh, where's the compassion and empathy? What happened to all lives matter? All of a sudden, all lives matter
right,
goes out the door when it
right.
comes to COVID, right?
We're not talking about
That's
Black, right?
right, right,
Because I want my grandma around. I'm sorry, I
right,
don't care. I don't want it to just be impacting old people or
right.
young people or
I,
babies. And if, again, this is when you're ill informed, because when you know what viruses do, like
right,
I said with the history, when you understand history, you know viruses don't care about ages. They
right,
don't care about color. They just want to
right,
host. You know?
right. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. We
So,
definitely have a lot of learning to do.
yeah. But again,
Um,
it's all designed. You know what I
right,
mean? It
right,
has all been designed. Even the propaganda that's putting against, you know, China and, you know, them starting COVID and all that stuff. This is all designed for us to not be aware of what's going on. And
right.
that's another thing. One last thing I want white people to understand is that racism hurts y'all just as much as it hurts us.
Hmm.
Because again, look who we have in office who could care less. I mean,
Yeah.
less.
Oh
I
yeah.
mean, he's trying to wipe out the middle class. He's trying to create this huge, like, we have to understand this is so much bigger than just looking at our skin color. Like, it's
Right.
going to impact all of us. Like, we have to, like, wake up.
Yeah. I think that's so true, and I think it's just so important. It means a lot to me that for you to say that, because and again, I hate to bring race into it, but I really feel like you saying that is more powerful than if I said it, because I'm the white privileged male saying like, oh well, I'm suffering just as much as you. But for you to be saying that, it's just such a strong, empathetic thing to say. I think it gives power to your, to where you're coming from. I don't necessarily agree that I've suffered, but I get what you're saying. Like in terms of systemically, like as a
Yeah,
people, it's
yeah.
I absolutely agree with that. As a people, we are all suffering because of this, and
And in various levels too, right? Like,
right,
of course, like I'm gonna suffer more.
right,
But like I said, when you think about like, I'll say it as simple as not, I met a white person who said they never encountered another black person, or they never encountered,
hmm.
different groups. Like that's
Yeah,
hurtful. Like
right,
that hurts you in a sense of it keeps you in this bubble to not be able to experience different forms of life, different
right,
almost like traveling. Like if you grew up in the city, and you never went outside your city, that hurts you. Maybe
yeah,
it doesn't hurt you systemically away, but it hurts
right,
your growth as a person to
right,
be able to engage with different walks of life, to be again to have that empathy, like to have be empathizing towards different ways of thinking, to have different discussions like that. That's what I mean by it also hurts white people as well too, right?
right,
um, because then you get exposed to something that or you've been brainwashed into thinking that something is true about a group that it actually isn't. Or it keeps you in this bubble of looking at one black person and saying, well, they're this way, so all black people are this way. Like that's limiting, you know
right,
what I
right,
mean? So
yeah,
that's what I mean by like it hurts, because it causes a sense of just complacency, right? Or like I
right,
said, you're comfortable with like we talked about this in the hiring field, right? Like,
hmm,
people hire who they trust.
right,
So if I'm only familiar with one group of people, if I'm only familiar with interacting and engaging with one group of people, I'm going to keep hiring that group,
right,
even if that person's not qualified. Same
right,
thing with Donald Trump.
hmm,
What would be the reason for us to put him in office? He has no political experience.
yeah,
He had, he had compared to even let's say Clinton or even Bush. Like let's do Bush, right? He is nothing of what Bush, Nixon, and even I guess even Reagan is. But we put him in office because he is what we are familiar with. We are
right,
used to having white men run the country,
right,
and no matter
right,
how mediocre and how uh, 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 inexperienced and unqualified that this person is, we put this person in office. That is currently hurting all of us. Like,
right,
so that's what I mean by like,
absolutely,
racism is hurting us because
yeah,
it keeps us from thinking outside of the box. It keeps us from hiring qualified people, and it keeps us from being open and empathetic to the human experience.
absolutely, yeah. You've said it all. You said it so much more eloquently than I could say it.
Okay.
I really appreciate it. As I said, I'm trying to do my share of listening, but also educating people that need to be. And I just, as I said, I always feel privileged to talk to you about this because you're just so smart and well spoken, and you teach me something new every time.
Yes.
So I really appreciate it.
Yes.
I know that you have a newborn, and so
Yes.
I don't want to keep you too much longer, but I did want to ask you about the Encouraging Life organization, whatever you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, I'll be real quick. So I have a nonprofit called the Encouraging Life Organization, and basically, it started off as really trying to look at like sexual and reproductive health and educating communities of color about sexual and reproductive health. But since then, it's evolved a little bit more to focusing on health disparities. So, under the Encouraging Life Organization, we have a annual conference every year for Black women, to really focus on health and mental health. to really bring Black women into a space where they can unwind, they can be connected to practitioners that look like them, and resources throughout Sacramento as well too. So yeah, that's part of what I do right now, and I'm really big involved in public health. I've been in public health for probably over 10 years now, and so seeing these disparities and talking about racism and how they impact health disparities has been my level of expertise. And so yeah,
That's really awesome.
that's it. Yeah.
How could people get in contact with you if they were interested in doing
Yeah,
a conference?
they can visit our website. It's www dot B as in boy, W as in women. It's basically the acronym Black Women's Health and Wellness Conference.
Okay.
Or they can go to Encouraging Life organization as well and get in touch with us too. And they can follow us at Black Women's Health and Wellness Conference on Instagram.
Cool. Okay. I'll put those in the description as well.
Yes, I'll
Uh,
send them to you because there's yeah.
and then one last thing, just to end on a more light note. The Last Dance. Have you been watching that at all?
Oh yes,
Did,
yes, 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 yes,
did you?
yes.
Because you're a Bulls fan, right?
I'm
Or
a Bulls fan.
Michael
Yep,
Jordan? Yeah. Okay, that's what I
yep,
thought.
yep,
I
yep.
I've been watching it too, and I actually just finished it today.
Nice.
The whole series. So I was curious of what your thoughts were on that.
It was amazing. I
Yeah.
was really happy that they highlighted the other players like Rodman and Steve Kerr
Right.
and Pippen, because I think it was just important to know that it wasn't just Jordan.
Right.
Although Jordan, he had that killer instinct, and it was amazing, and just was a lot of nostalgia too. I think I have a
Yeah.
whole new level of respect for Phil Jackson and Dennis Rodman.
Oh
Like
yeah.
I absolutely love Phil Jackson,
Hmm.
just his coaching style and his ability to really be with the players. I see why he was so successful with the Lakers.
Right.
Uh, and yeah, it just took me back to a lot of like what was happening in the 90s,
So, yeah.
even though
Same
I'm
for
just
me.
super young.
Right. I liked it because as you said, it brought me back. I got into basketball more like mid to late '90s, so
Oh, perfect.
I knew like I mean, I knew what you see on TV. Like I watched them win their second three-peat. But as you said, they also pointed to a lot of stuff from earlier in his career, even in the '80s and the '90s. I liked how they did that. How they would shoot from the beginning, in time
Yeah,
lapse, right? They would do like, okay, this is '91, and then they'd shoot back to '98. So you
yeah,
do, and yeah, like as you said, mentioned like Steve Kerr. I didn't know the stuff about him and his father, and
right.
so
Yeah,
it was interesting.
yeah,
Yeah, I
yeah.
liked getting the personal side of the players.
Yeah, and it was good to see how Jordan has this like he really built himself up to be Michael Jordan. It wasn't
Right.
this overnight sensation. Like you really saw how he got to where he was and how hard he worked.
Yeah,
I think that was a good thing to see.
definitely. I even got emotional that part when he was talking about like this is how I play. Like
Right,
if you don't want to play that way, don't play that way.
right,
But because I
right.
think he was taking heat for being kind of like a kind of an asshole. Like that's what I heard
Yeah,
in terms of
yeah.
practicing. But that's what he needed to be.
That's
Like if
yeah,
you're going to
be.
be the
Yeah,
best, you kind of have to be that a little
yeah,
bit. And
yeah,
you could tell he felt very strongly about that.
yeah. Yes,
Well, anyway, Jessica, it's been a real pleasure talking to you.
yes, of
Um,
course. Anytime.
anytime, yeah, anytime you want to come back on the show, please let me know. I would love to have you on again.
Yes, that'd be great.
Hopefully for a good, a positive reason. Um, but
Yeah.
but
Well, I'm open to having these discussions. I think they're important. I mean, like I think I told you before, you know, in a when things like this initially happen, like with George Floyd, it's hard to have a conversation in that moment.
right,
I will say we do have to have these conversations. We do
hmm
have to meet people where they're at. It's
right,
just at the time of mourning, do not ask your black friend what you can do. Like,
hmm
or what books you can
right,
read. Like, don't
right,
make it about you. Like,
right,
that's human
absolutely,
being one on one. Like, if someone is grieving, you don't make it
yes,
about you. You try to make it
right,
about them and what you can do for them. So I just think that,
absolutely,
with these conversations, they are a must, and they need to be happening ongoing, not just when something happens. We need to
right,
constantly be having these conversations about how we can get to know each other and tear down these walls and unbreak these bubbles. So where I can see you
right,
and say, this is a human being. They deserve the utmost respect. regardless, like
Right.
regardless. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
So that's what I want us to get to.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm right there with you.
Yeah.
I'm thankful that we have this ability now with technology to reconnect like this.
Yeah, I
And
know, right?
yeah, we
Okay.
we'll be talking again soon.
Okay, sounds good.
All right.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you once again for checking out the podcast. I really hope that you enjoyed our conversation and that you were able to get something out of it. I know I certainly learned a lot. And please share this message with anybody that you think would benefit off of it. I do think that this conversation is just so important right now. And as I said before, we're at a pivotal moment in our country, and we have to make a choice as a people of which way we want to go from here. So please hit that thumbs up button if you like what you're hearing, and subscribe if you want to hear more of these messages. And again, have a great rest of your day. And remember, don't be afraid to question the consensus.